Greetings, punks, goths, metalheads and herberts. How you're all doing? My name's John and this is the Health Anarchist channel. Well, today I wanted to do a video about burial mounds. Now on maps they're usually called tumulus, or the plural tumuli if there's a few of them in a group, but they're also known as barrows, and in some parts of the country they're known as cairns. So my interest in this subject goes back years to the 80s. I remember being about 14 at school in a geography lesson, and the teacher was teaching us about map reading, and she pointed out that sometimes on a map you'll see something called a tumulus, and it has a little symbol next to it, and basically what these are ancient burial mounds. And I was fascinated, but she said not a lot was found in them, usually just bones. But anyway, at the same time as this I was reading Lord of the Rings, and there was a chapter there called Fog on the Barrow Downs, and it was my favourite chapter of the book, and it was all about ancient burial mounds. And plus the fact that I was an avid D&D player, which Dungeons and Dragons at that time. I still am into D&D actually, but anyway, I was into that as well at the time. So I was deeply interested and fascinated in this subject of burial mounds. So sometimes you guys are going to come across these, whether you're out in the field doing a walk or if you see them on maps. So I thought I'd do a specific video talking about them today. It's not going to be too technical. I'm just an ordinary guy, so I'm just going to speak about it in ordinary terms, nothing too highbrow or academic. But if you want me to go into more detail in the future, I happily will do that. So, Barrow in England is an ancient burial place covered with a large mound of earth. In Scotland, Ireland and Wales, the equivalent term is cairn. Barrows were constructed in England from the Neolithic, that's circa 4000 BC, until late pre-Christian, circa AD 600 times. Barrows of the Neolithic period were long in shape and contained various members of a family or clan, while those of the early Bronze Age were round in shape and were used to bury an important single individual, perhaps a chief or clan leader. Bodies were placed in stone or wooden vaults over which large mounds of soil were heaped. Both types of barrow continued to be used in England until the advent of Christianity. Their sites are common in the county of Wiltshire. So what's a bit confusing is on maps they're always called tumulus or tumuli, more or less. And it can be a little bit confusing, but it's all the same thing. They're all different types of barrows. So the easiest way for me to remember it all is the Neolithic long barrows were really long and were used to house lots and lots of bodies from the community, and the later Bronze Age barrows were usually used to bury an individual or just a few individuals. So that's kind of the easiest way I remember it. There's many different types of barrows. I mean, there's a big long list. There's like disc barrows, saucer barrows, pond barrows, and even these like ring barrows which look like a giant donut. Now there's one not too far from me in this area, so I'm going to visit that disc barrow because I believe it's still in quite good condition. And also where I live in Staley Bridge, just above me on the hills, there's two ancient barrows, burial mounds. There's one I've visited and one that's harder to find, which I've not been able to find it yet, but I will try in future. So a really good book on this subject which I've got, and I've actually got a little bit of a story about this, is a great book, and it's called 10 Years Diggings in Celtic and Saxon Grave Hills in the counties of Derby, Stafford and York from 1848 to 1858. And the book is by Thomas Bateman. He was a very early archaeologist. His work today would be really criticised by archaeologists because his techniques were quite crude by modern day standards, but still he opened a lot of these burial mounds to examine them in the Victorian era, and he often did a lot of illustrations and stuff in his books and describe what he found. So even though it's quite crude, it's quite an interesting book and an interesting read. Now, I first saw this book about 25 years ago in a bookshop, and I was pretty skint at the time, and I looked at the book and it was like this really plush bound edition, and all the illustrations were like coloured in it, and it just looked fantastic. All these like pictures of open graves with skeletons and stuff, and but it was 140 quid, and I just didn't have that kind of money. But if I've ever wanted a book really badly, that's probably the book I wanted the most, and I still regret. But it was like an antique book at a high price, but if I had had the money, it would have been well worth it. But anyway, because it's so old now, it's kind of in public domain, so there's digital print-offs of the book, and I own one of those. So it was great that I eventually got to read it. So what I'll do is, with it being public domain, I'll put in a link below, and you can have a read of the free digital version if that so interests you. Through reading the book, my summary of what they contained when they opened these up, it was usually partial or complete skeletons, or sometimes cremated remains, depending on the time era and the practices of the people at the time, I guess. Also very common was pottery vessels. Sometimes these contain the cremated remains. Also very common was flint tools, probably like these here. I'll just show you now. And then more rarer, you'd find things like beads, gaming PCs, and very rarely you'd find things like copper daggers, like this reproduction. As you notice, the blade's quite small on this, and it's because the metal was a precious commodity at the time. And then later on in the Bronze Age, very rarely you'd find things like bronze ornaments or Bronze Age weapons, like this one. And very, very rarely you'd sometimes find things like a golden cup. I think a couple of those have been found. There was the gold cape from Mould in Wales, and I think round Stonehenge they found things like little gold bits of jewellery, but those are very, very rare. So that's basically the summary of what, when you read about it, they've tended to find in these burial mounds in the past. But I mean, I think the skeletons are just as interesting. They probably have a lot more to tell us if you study those skeletal remains. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. It'll give you something to think about next time you come across ancient burial mounds. If you did enjoy today's video, please don't forget to give us a like and subscribe. And until the next video, keep yourselves very safe. Take care. Bye.